just want to start this video by doing a quick potted history of the SJ-Cam range. Back in June 13 I reviewed the original SJ1000 action camera. 8 months later they put pretty much those same internals into a new shell and called it the SJ4000. 6 months after that they introduced Wi-Fi to the range, and now 3 months later I'm looking at the SJ-Cam M10. Now, the SJ-Cam people have never been shy at borrowing other people's design ideas. The original SJ1000 looked quite a lot like a liquid image ego. Of course, the SJ4000 bears quite a striking resemblance to the GoPro range. And now the M10, well, I think it's probably been influenced a little bit by the Polaroid Cube camera. Now, I just bought the basic set, and this is what the box for that one looks like. One thing I did notice, though, on the side here it mentions apps. Now, you don't need apps for this camera because it's got no built-in Wi-Fi. However, if you look underneath this sticker on the top, you can see they do obviously plan on bringing out a Wi-Fi model in the near future. Inside the box, very simple setup. I've just got a USB lead, the camera, and some instruction booklets, of course, usual micro USB for data transfer and charging. Now, the instruction booklet quickly starts repeating itself because it's got multiple languages in here. However, this page here goes into some of the accessories that you would get if you bought the more deluxe set, as well as some optional accessories that you can buy. I'd suggest if you are getting this camera, probably go for the more deluxe one. It comes with all those additional mounts, as well as the waterproof case that you can see here at the front of the manual. So the basic set that I got doesn't come with the waterproof case, but it does have this cradle type attachment. It's got a tripod screw hole in the bottom and the top, and a clip on the back. Now, of course, with a tripod screw you can attach it to pretty much anything, but it's not going to be waterproof. Now, if you take that clip off the back, you can see through the back of there onto the screen, so you could use it as a car dash cam, attach it to a suction cup with that, and still be able to see what's happening on the screen. Of course, it pulls out of this. It's a little bit fiddly. You have to wiggle it out to get it out of there, but that's good because it means it's not going to fall out on its own. We'll just have a quick look around the camera. You can see it's not a cube. I mentioned the Polaroid Cube at the beginning, but this isn't a cube. It's a bit of a strange shape. It's kind of taller than it is wide, and quite fat as well, quite deep. We'll just get the battery out of the bottom here. It's got a different type of battery attached to the one on the SJ4000. It works a little bit better, this. Just pull the battery out though and have a look, and it is exactly the same battery as you get in an SJ4000, the same capacity, so I'm going to imagine we're going to get the same battery life out of it. I haven't tested that, but I don't see any reason why it'd be any different. There's a speaker on one side with the micro HDMI and the micro USB and the micro SD card slot. On this side we've got 3 buttons. We've got an M in the middle, an up and a down, and a microphone, and then we've got the mode button and the start stop record next to one LED on the top. Going to put in a class 10 micro SD card. Use up to 32 gigs I think in this one. Just switch it on and see what happens. Now when the screen comes on you get a little bit of a SJ-Cam thing and then a flash about the M10, and then once it turns up it looks very familiar. It looks just like the SJ4000 camera's menus. One thing, you press this little menu button here, it gets you straight into the setup menus, and everything is exactly the same. The first thing I tried, 720p 60. Is it really 720p 60? We know on the SJ4000 it isn't, and it isn't on this camera either. It's 720p 30 with each frame shown twice, which tells me that this camera is exactly the same camera as the SJ4000, just in a different case. Now, when you compare the two cameras side by side, on the pictures the M10 looked an awful lot smaller, but you can see in reality there's not a great deal in it. The dimensions have just been shifted around a little bit. The M10 is deeper than the SJ4000 and it's taller, but then the SJ4000 is wider, if you see what I mean. It's basically the same volume of stuff, just shoved in a different size case. The screen's on the back, even though the one on the SJ4000 looks larger. It's only because it's got a larger surround. They've got the exact same LCD screen size. If you notice any difference between the two pictures, it's probably down to the focal lengths of the camera because I've got them in slightly different positions, but you can see the field of view on both cameras is identical. And ignore any differences with brightness and things, that's because I've been messing around with the menus. There is, however, one difference on the M10. It's got this little M button in the middle. So it's got 5 buttons in total, whereas the SJ4000 only has 4 buttons. Now, the reason that's quite useful is because on the SJ4000, to get to the setups, you had to press the mode button and cycle through the video, the photo, the playback, and get into the setup menus like that every time you wanted to change anything. On the M10, it's a lot more convenient. You just press that M button in the middle, you're straight into the setup menus. There are another couple of very subtle differences. The SJ4000 camera weighs 60.6 grams, but the M10 is slightly heavier at 67.6 grams. Perhaps that means that the construction of the camera is better and it uses better quality components inside it. Who knows? The other thing I noticed, the file system. On the old SJ4000, it just used to put all the files into one giant folder, whereas on the M10 it seems to split the files up into individual folders based on the shooting sequence. Now maybe this is something to do with the firmware. They might have updated the SJ4000 firmware and I haven't done it on mine, and this is the firmware that I'm currently using on the M10 camera. So other than those very subtle changes, the M10 camera is effectively the SJ4000 camera in a different shaped case. Now, since it's only 3 months since I reviewed that camera, there's no point me going over this whole thing all over again. If you want to see how the SJ4000 performs, click the link in the video description or click the annotation that's on the screen now. However, because I've now got two cameras that are identical other than in shape, I can do a little bit of an update to a video I did before. I recently reviewed the SJ4000 versus the GoPro budget camera. Now, in the comments to that video, a few people mentioned that when I was doing the demonstration of the GoPro versus the SJ4000 and how it copes with light, it didn't seem that I was getting a good result as I did when I reviewed the SJ4000 camera on its own a couple of months earlier. Now, there's no conspiracy here. The real reason that that's happened is because I reviewed the SJ4000 camera in September 2014, doing the shooting during the end of August and September, whereas the comparison video was shot in November. And the reason that that makes a difference is because the sun is a lot lower in the sky. Notice this shot here, it's 12:19, that's lunchtime. This is the SJ4000. Going into the sun, you can see how low the sun is and it makes the screen very dark. Now the SJ4000 is pretty bad at coping with light changes like this. I say bad, it's not good anyway. But now I've got both these cameras, I can do different settings in each one to show you what difference that makes to the results that you get, because basically it's the same camera. So in the M10 I'm changing the white balance from auto into cloudy, because some people recommend that's a good way to get rid of that bluey tinge. The exposure I'm moving up to +1/3. And then finally I'm going to turn the HDR mode on in the M10. I didn't have it on in the comparison video between the SJ4000 and the GoPro because I wanted to use both cameras with their stock settings. Here's the difference now. The M10 HDR on, ISO +1/3, white balance cloudy. The SJ4000 everything 0 or off. So let's compare them side by side. Look for the little timestamp at the bottom left. You see where it says M10 after the time there. That's how you're going to identify the cameras from one another. SJ4000 on the left, M10 on the right. Notice how things are a lot yellowy because of that cloudy setting that I've done for the white balance, but also notice the M10 definitely seems to be quite a little bit brighter with those settings on, and I've got to repeat, the SJ4000 would produce exactly the same results with the same settings. So let's do another little bit of a comparison here. This is the M10 inside the shopping centre. You can see that's got a yellowy tinge on it, and that's the SJ4000. It goes a little bit more bluey. Again, look for that stamp at the bottom to show you which one's which. So we'll move them side by side. So that's the difference. It's a little bit more subtle in here. One goes slightly towards the warmer end and one goes to the colder end of the colour spectrum. But other than that, not a great deal of difference, although you do see a little bit more detail. However, try it at night and look at this. This is the SJ4000 with all those settings at 0. Looks fine, doesn't it, at night? Now let's look at the M10 and look how yellowy everything's gone. So that cloudy setting, you've got to be careful with it. You've got to only switch it on really at the right time of day and switch it off again if you want it to have any effect. So for the remainder of the shots, I've turned the cloudy thing off and just left it, as you see there, the M10's got HDR on, ISO +1/3, and the SJ4000 is still on stock. So let's have a look inside the Printworks here, which is a covered environment. It's quite dark, as you can see, because you can see the neon lights and things. That's the M10. Let's just flip over to the SJ4000. So the only difference I've got here is the ISO's bumped up 1/3 on the M10 and the HDR is on. It just looks a little bit better. Compare them still side by side. There's not a massive amount of difference, but I definitely prefer the settings that I've got on the M10, I think, just to bring it up a little bit. So another shot walking into the sun. One thing you will notice on this, with the settings that I've got on the M10, they are a little bit better as far as getting detail out of the shot where things are dark. You can notice where this chap's jacket and trousers meet, whereas on the other one it just looks like it's all the same item of clothing. I'll just be quiet for a second so you can just have a little listen to the sound recorded on the M10. So just to clarify, if you have exactly the same settings in the M10 and the SJ4000, you'll get exactly the same results from both cameras. You can, however, tweak those settings a little bit to improve things, but even then you still don't get quite up to the standard of the budget GoPro when it comes to adjusting for different lighting environments. Now let's bring in the Polaroid Cube. As you can see, the Cube is quite a lot smaller than the M10. The thing that the M10 has, it's got the lens sticking out on the front of it, which makes it a bit deeper. If you took that off, the Cube would be about the same depth, but in every other dimension, the M10 is quite a bit bigger. But of course, the M10 has the advantage of having that screen in it, as well as quite a lot of extra functions, such as the ability to be used as a car DVR dash cam. Now there's one additional comparison I wanted to be able to do in this video, but unfortunately I'm unable to, and that's to compare the size of the original SJ1000 with the new, smaller M10. Unfortunately I can't find my SJ1000, but luckily when I reviewed it I did write down the dimensions of that camera so I can compare them side by side now, and I can say that overall the new M10 is about the same width. It's 30% shorter, but it is 20% deeper than the old SJ1000. So overall, it's a little bit smaller, but perhaps not as much as you might think. Now, if I were to choose between these two cameras today, I would definitely go for the M10 over the SJ4000. Obviously, having that extra menu button on there is handy, but it's all down to the fact that I've never really liked the GoPro styling with a lens at one side and a large oblong front. I'd much rather have a more discreet camera with a lens in the middle and a cube style case. Obviously, it's not as small as a Polaroid Cube, but it costs less than half the price and it's an awful lot more capable. You can use it as a dash cam, for example. Now, before I go, there's just something I want to do to respond to this comment that I received on one of my recent videos. And on that note, I think my work here is done. However, if you want to know more about the M10, then just watch the full SJ4000 review. After all, it's the same camera. There's links to that in the video description. If you want to buy an M10, then there's links up there for that as well. I suggest you get the more expensive of the two packs. The cheap one's about £45, the more expensive one's 60-ish. After all, in the more expensive one, you get all the additional mounting options and that waterproof case. But that's it for the moment. As always, thanks for watching.